In this tutorial, we'll be looking at sensitivity analysis. In particular, we'll be looking at a version of sensitivity analysis called what-if analysis. Recall that sensitivity analysis speaks to the change in your cash flows when you change one of the variables. So let's say I've got profit, and my profit is 5,000 Rand. What will happen to this profit if I take the selling price from 10 Rand to 9 Rand? In other words, how sensitive is my cash flow, how sensitive is my profit to a change in one of the variables, the variable here being the selling price. At this point, it's worth going over how to calculate the net profit of a business. The net profit of a business is equal to the total income of that business minus the total costs of that business. The total income of a business is a function of two things. It's the selling price per unit multiplied by the number of units. Your total cost, on the other hand, can be broken down into two types of costs. There are costs that vary with production. So we call that your total variable cost. The more you produce, the more your total variable costs. And there are costs which do not vary with production. We just call this total fixed costs. Total income is affected by the number of units sold, and the total variable cost is also affected by the total number of units sold. So therefore, this formula can be shortened to the following. Your selling price per unit minus your variable cost per unit multiplied by the total number of units will give you what's referred to as the total contribution. Your total contribution minus your total fixed costs will give you your net profit. Now let's see how this works by way of an example. Let's say you've got a certain product. Let's call it product A. Product A has got the following properties. It's got a selling price of 10 Rand. It's got a variable cost of 5 Rand. It's got total fixed costs of 10,000 Rand. The current number of units sold is 4,000. We are now in a position to work out the profit of product A. Now, coming back to this formula, we'll work out the profit as follows. The selling price is 10 Rand, the variable cost is 5 Rand, the number of units sold is 4,000, and the total fixed cost is 10,000 Rand. So therefore, a marginal income of 5 Rand, marginal income is basically the per unit variable profit, multiplied by the total number of units sold will give us the total contribution. From the total contribution, we deduct the total fixed cost of 10,000 Rand. So 5 times 4,000 gives you a total contribution of 20,000. You minus your total fixed costs of 10,000, and this gives you a profit of 10,000. The question then becomes, how sensitive is this profit to a change in the selling price? Or how sensitive is this profit to a change in the variable cost per unit? You could also say, how sensitive is this profit to a change in the fixed costs? How sensitive is this profit to a change in the number of units? Regardless of which variable you're supposed to check in order to determine the sensitivity of the profit to that variable, the calculation remains the same. Let's have a look at how this works Again, by way of an example. Referring back to the formula, we know that net profit is equal to your selling price minus your variable cost per unit. This calculation multiplied by the number of units, which gives you the total contribution, and then you take away your fixed cost. So for us to make a loss, which means a profit of 0, how much would our selling price have to be? So you leave that as the unknown in the equation. Everything else, you plug in the variables, or you plug in the figures as per the original question. So your variable cost per unit is 5 Rand. The number of units stays the same at 4,000 Rand. The total fixed cost stays the same at 10,000 Rand. So 4,000 is P minus your 5 Rand times 4,000 gives you 20,000. That's your total variable cost, and your total fixed cost remain the same at 10,000 Rand. So 4,000 is P minus 30,000 Rand is supposed to give us a net profit of 0. 4,000 is P is equal to 30,000 Rand. Therefore, per unit can drop to a value that is calculated by taking the 30,000 Rand divided by the 4,000 units. So your selling price per unit is 7 Rand 50, which means that your selling price per unit can drop by 2 Rand 50 before you start making a loss. It can drop by 25%. Anything more will result in you making a loss. If the question had instead asked, not for the sensitivity of profit to selling price, but a sensitivity of profit to variable cost, you would do exactly the same calculation like we did here. The only difference is that you would make your variable cost per unit the unknown in the equation, and everything else you keep as per the original question. So now the variable of interest is variable cost. We're looking at the sensitivity of our profit to a change or an increase in the variable cost. Making your net profit 0, which would indicate a break-even point, you plug into the equation all the values as per the original question, save for the value of interest, or the variable of interest, which is your variable cost. So the selling price per unit is 10 Rand, your variable cost per unit, that's what you're looking for. The total number of units is 4,000, and your total fixed cost remain the same at 10,000 Rand. So the 10 Rand multiplied by 4,000 units sold will give you a total income of 40,000 minus your total variable costs of 4,000 multiplied by the variable cost minus your total fixed cost of 10,000 Rand. So bringing the 4,000 variable cost onto the other side, 4,000 variable cost is equal to the 40,000 Rand, which is a positive, minus your total fixed cost of 10,000 Rand. So this gives you 30,000 Rand. So your variable cost per unit is equal to 30,000 Rand divided by 4,000 units. This gives you a variable cost of 7 Rand 50. So your variable cost can increase by 2 Rand 50, and only if it increases by more than 2 Rand 50 will you start making a loss. So this makes sense, right? We saw that our selling price per unit can go down by 2 Rand 50 before you make a loss. Or our variable cost per unit can go up by 2 Rand 50 before you make a loss. We can do the same for total fixed cost. We can also do the same for total number of units. It's also possible to phrase the question differently. So instead of asking how much our selling price has to be before we make a loss, we can ask how much our selling price has to be before we make a certain profit. So this can be 10,000, it can be 5,000, it can be 20,000, it can be whatever. But the way in which you calculate a question of this sort remains the same throughout, regardless of how it is that it's posed to you. You just plug in the figures as per the original question, and that which it is that you're looking for, you make that the unknown in your formula.